About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
And this is Noetic Moments, where we explore that field of research that discovers what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very wonderful if we understood it better. I'm Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and anthropology, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research and explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. For those of you who are new to this show, we remind you every week that consciousness in medicine psychology is usually defined as being awake and aware and knowing what's going on around us. In the field of noetics, though, consciousness is much more. It's the processes and products of mind, both in our awareness and outside of it. And it's ultimately what connects us all. So far in this series, we've been exploring a number of models and experiments around consciousness, what it is and how it works. We started with Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung's ideas from the early 20th century, explaining how much of what goes on in the mind is not in our normal awareness. It is, in fact, unconscious. Then we looked at Charles Tart's 1960s descriptions of the various states of consciousness, in which sometimes things we are not aware of in one state, we are aware of in another. Then Julian Jaynes relating consciousness to the separation of right and left hemispheres of our brain. We then looked at some of the field models of mind that have been developed over the years by Kurt Levine, Rupert Sheldrake, and others, trying to explain how it is that mind affects and is affected by the body and other things faster than nerve signals can travel in the body. Which brought up, of course, how quantum mechanics relates to consciousness. And we looked at the work of David Bohm, Dana Zohar, and Amit Goswami to understand that. We also looked at the idea of a global brain, or a noosphere, as described by Peter Russell, Teilhard de Chardin, and Ervin Laszlo. We went on to explore the field of transpersonal psychology, which applies these understandings in therapy and research. And then we looked at how the biology is related to the consciousness, with the work of Bruce Lipton and Candace Pert, who described how hormones act as molecules of emotion and can lead to a biology that's based on our belief system, which led us to what is increasingly called coherence, the state of consciousness in which the heart, the mind, and the emotions are all in alignment. We've explored some of the experimental results supporting these new ideas of consciousness, demonstrating telepathic communication between two people, mind directly affecting matter, and the experience of remote viewing or clairvoyance. We talked about the different states of consciousness that we move through every day, and we explored frequencies and how we can move into higher and lower frequencies of vibration patterns in the brain and the heart using the work of Penny Pierce, the study of cymatics, and the water crystal experiments of Masaru Emoto, and more. For several episodes, we looked at the healing process and the role that consciousness and energy flows play in the body's response to threats and distress. And then we looked at the structure and function of the brain, which is the bridge between mind and body, even though materialist and physicalist scientists think the brain is the origin of our consciousness. which then, of course, led us to explore how the mind, not being a function of the brain, seems to continue operating even though the brain may not be functioning at all. When the heart and brain have flatlined and the person is declared dead, and yet comes back with mental processes that occurred during the time that the brain is flatlined. To explain all that, we looked again at Irvin Laszlo's global mind, which he calls the Akash, as in the Akashic record, and at a physicist's remarkable discovery that the equations that describe a neural network as a system describe the behaviors of quantum reality when that system is in balance, and of classical Newtonian reality when the system is far from equilibrium. That then helped us to understand more fully how bodies can heal simply by a shift in the mind, in the consciousness of the individual, through their own beliefs and actions, and through their reliance on others, as in the placebo effect. We then returned to Rupert Sheldrake and looked more deeply at how morphic fields work and how they affect our experience, including the placebo effect. And last week, we went off in a totally different direction. We talked about sound, that particular frequency or set of frequencies that affects our brains in so many ways, and how music helps to synchronize our brain function and connect it more clearly with the body function. You can catch up on those past shows on the KXCR.net archives. You want to click on the little cloud up on the banner at the top of the screen. And on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to the clips, the books, and the authors that I mention. Today, I thought we would look at energy in the body. We talked a while back about the human energy biofield or the human bioenergy field, depending on who's talking. And we've talked about vibration and frequency and a little bit about how electrical signals are passed from neuron to neuron. And we've even talked about that energy field. But what we haven't talked about is what this energy is, and how it affects us, and is affected by the various activities of the body and the mind. So today I'm introducing a young researcher for Columbia University whose primary interest is the mitochondria. The mitochondria are those little organelles within every cell that take the chemicals, especially the glucose, that are circulating through the body and converts that to the energy that the body uses to warm itself and to move its many interconnected parts. His name is Martin Picard, and here is a small part of one of his lectures.
You could look at a dead animal or a dead body. How do you tell apart the living from the dead?
The cell has activity, I guess.
Activity, yes. Some questions, yes.
Consumption of energy.
Consumption of energy, yes. So one very basic, fundamental aspect of life is that there's a flow of energy. So you look at a rock, for example. The rock can get warmer, it can get cooler, but there's no flow of energy through the rock. The rock doesn't sustain energy flow. You look at a smiling, feeling, thinking person, like Gina here, for example. Gina, you can measure actually the flow of energy through the body, right? The breath is a very fundamental one. Breathing is so key. A lot of living things breathe. And the reason we breathe is to bring oxygen to the body. And where does oxygen go? To the blood, yes. And then the blood transports oxygen to the cells. And then the oxygen gets in the cells and goes to mitochondria. The reason we breathe is to bring oxygen down to the mitochondria. And that sustains the flow of energy in the body. So the flow of energy is central to life. So how does that happen? And what do mitochondria have to do with this? But why do we need that energy? And one main reason is that we need that energy to interact with the environment. If we want to be able to perceive something, not just the act of seeing something, you need energy in the retina of your eye so that the photon can excite a cell, and then that can create an action potential that then reaches a part of the brain that perceives or processes that visual stimulus. But so all of this is energy dependent. So we need energy to process information. And we're going to talk about stress. So we'll talk about why energy and energy in the context of stress. So if we want to be able to respond to a stressor, let's say wound healing, for example. There's a wound that you can, cause to med students during their exam period. So here's a wound. Now the body needs to know, what do I do with this? So first it needs to perceive that there is injury. So that the wound will be the stressor in this case. And there could be all sorts of different stressors and stimuli. It could be auditory, visual, metabolic stressors or signals. They're going to be real or imagined. Or real stressors like a wound. But you can also, while giving a public lecture, be imagining that your integrity is threatened. And we actually use this in the lab. It's called public speaking and socio-evaluative threat. So the body responds to this. You imagine that you're in danger, and the heart accelerates, and you start to sweat, and there stress hormones that are released, and all of that. So this is happening only because there's energy in the body, and the body is able to perceive this. But then it's not just a reaction. It's not just a reflex. There's some information that's contained within you in form of memories, in the form of what genes you have that predispose you to have a certain constitution. And based on your past experiences, you remember what it is to be in the situation, and you adapt accordingly.
Dr. Picard is helping us to see that whatever we are doing, breathing, eating, whatever, we are contributing to the body's ability to take in and produce energy. And that energy then is used for all kinds of things in the body. But as you'll note, he pointed out that what is going on in the mind affects the body's ability to take in what is necessary and also to transform what is taken in into the energy that we use. Our feelings, our thoughts, our expectations, our memories all contribute to what the body is able to do. So once again, the brain filled with all of these ideas limits the ongoing support of the mind for the body, and then limits what the body can do to generate the energy it needs to be effective. We all have had the experience of finding our thoughts being so messed up, so dysfunctional, that we can't hardly function in our bodies. One of my favorite stories by an author is that she had a book deadline and she would sit down to write and she'd immediately be exhausted and couldn't even hold her head up and would stumble to the couch and get under the blanket and go to sleep. And this happened day after day after day until she realized that she had somehow built a barrier in her thinking to actually being able to turn out this book. So she shifted to thinking about how wonderful it was going to be to have the book done rather than how much work it was going to be to get it done. And so she was able to slowly but steadily overcome this sudden onset of dreadful fatigue that had become her pattern. The thoughts in her normal thought structure, we talked about that before, the normal structure of the brain, had set up a process by which the message was not getting sent properly to the various parts of the body, that it was time now to be creative and to be active and to be motivated. The message instead was that this was a terrifying task and exhausting, and that it was impossible to do with one's current energy levels. Maintaining our energy level is, therefore, a huge part of the relationship between mind and brain and body. The mind is constantly guiding the body to be energized and be fully ready to move and act in whatever way is our fulfillment to move and act. Whereas the brain is doing what it's been trained to do. It's limiting what is getting to the body. It is determining how much of what is getting to the body is in alignment with past memory, experience, fears, concerns, etc., energy then is one of the ways that we can monitor the reaction, the interaction of the various parts of the brain and the mind to see whether the brain is actually allowing the mind to support and sustain this body, allowing the oxygen to be used by the mitochondria and the glucose to be used by the mitochondria in order for the body to function at its peak effectiveness, which is what the mind is designed to do. So let's look at a book. Let's look at a book that has to do with how we can make or improve that brain-body connection. And the book is called Making the Brain-Body Connection by Sharon Promislow. It's an ebook on Kindle, and it's designed to help people understand the various ways in which the brain actually does affect our experience. And she talks about something that many of you have encountered recently, the flight and fight classic responses to stress. And there is a new one that's emerged. It's called freeze. We're under stress and we can't do anything. Sharon says, the fourth F is typically a female response. Current research suggests that women tend to flock under stress. They release more oxytocin, that brain hormone, the neurotransmitter responsible for love and bonding, and endorphins, feel-good messengers, hormones, and are much more likely to turn to friends and family to both provide and receive support, solace, problem-solving, and protection. A very positive response, Sharon says. Once again, science seems to support what most of us have already observed. Freeze, fight, flight, or flock. And which reaction is your most common response? Then she says, the integral role the mind, heart, and emotions play on our physical well-being has been even more recognized in the past few years by science and by alternative practitioners. And she lists some of the things we've looked at, including psychoneuroimmunology and energy psychology and other modalities that honor the interface of mind, body, emotions, and spirit. They underscore the basic truth. It's essential for us to understand the big picture of how our brain and body systems work together, both affected by and affecting our response to the world around us. So this book is a set of exercises and guidelines for making the brain-body connection more effective. She says, I've chosen to simply speak of the brain-body system rather than engage in a discussion of mind and consciousness, as they are a much more complex topic. First things first. On the most basic level, the brain is simply and complexly a vital organ of the body, a part of the whole. And then she says, as an educational kinesiologist, my passion is getting people to understand and improve their brain-body hardware to establish and or strengthen the neural connections for better learning and performance. My goal has always been to communicate how the brain, body, and senses work and how they can perform better for you. And that's all from the introduction of Sharon Promislow, Promislow, Making the Brain-Body Connection. And we will have that link on the website as soon as this show is put up on it. It's all kinds of fun things in this book about how to get in touch with what she has to offer, and she encourages you to move around and do whatever you need to, take breaks while you're going through it, because you're going to have all kinds of possibilities unfolding. She says, when we are functioning at our best, clear messages feed from all parts of the body to the brain and back again to the body in a loop. And that is what we are all aiming for, that clear message between the brain and the body. And she says a state is a, quote, mind-body moment, unquote, and is made up of our thoughts, our feelings, and our physiology, including our eye movements, breathing patterns, postures and gestures, state of health, and physical comfort. A state can change instantaneously when you change any of those variables. Very useful and helpful information, this ebook that is on Kindle, and she explains how the kinesiology that she works with can help us address all of those wonderful things. If you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments on KXCR, 90.7 on the FM dial, and streaming on KXCR.net. And that sound tells me that we need to look at what's going on in the world today and what you, the listeners, are curious about, and that you get to tell me about by sending me emails. What I learned about today that I thought you would get a quick about is a young boy in England who was dying, but something happened. And is related to what we were talking about last week when we were talking about music. The title of the story is Dying Dagenham Boy with Rare Genetic Condition is, quote, brought back to life, unquote, after hearing Mum sing to him. Isn't that marvelous? So Jennifer Osborne has sung at festivals internationally, sang the tune from a popular 2017 musical movie in a quiet room to her 9-year-old son, Jake, who was suffering from respiratory failure. Jennifer, the singer, the mom, and her husband, James, had huge fears about Jake passing away at home, and they moved their son to a hospice where he was put under palliative care. She said, I looked at the nurse and I said to her, what do I do? Because I was so frightened to be there. I was really scared to be there. They took the oxygen machine off of him, and she said, maybe just sing to him. She says, he took this deep breath, and it actually kind of brought him back. The doctor came back in, and she put her stethoscope on his chest and could not believe it. Everyone said, it was your singing that brought him back and made him actually carry on to be able to keep fighting. So we got to have him for another 11 months, which was really very, very nice. He did die a year later, and the song that she had sung was the song that was played at the funeral. So if you've ever been around anyone who's passing away, remember that hearing the sound of music, as we learned in last week's show, can be helpful. Oh, and by the way, the song that she sang, The Greatest Showman's Million Dreams. Well, that's it for today's show. The next time we get together, we'll look at more of the research being done in an attempt to understand what consciousness is, what it really does, and how we can experience life differently when we use it fully. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there's a list of the shows and links to the titles and other resources we refer to. You can find the archives of all the shows we've done. And you can send me your comments and questions, which I'll do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments at KXCR Community Radio, 90.7 FM in Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.